Well, we've just experienced the wealth of knowledge, the wealth of the collections relating to navigation, positions, and the history of it all in just about every aspect of our lives and our history. I think this has been a wonderful, very rich introduction. I'll never think of Polaris the same way again. For me, it was just one of those B-type supergiant stars that never seemed to move in the sky. But now,
Turn it on.
it's a symbol.
Turn it on.
Yeah. Oh, it helps to turn it on. Did that help? Did it make a difference? Okay, good. Okay. Well, we are now in the question and answer portion, and I see my first hand over here, and if you do want to ask a question, could you get over to the mic there? Oh, and while she's getting there, I have an immediate question. All of those different the star books, how come he had so many copies? Yeah.
Cornell.
Yeah.
Well, Cornell, I mean, he wanted to cross-index, so he would buy things with the intention of cutting them up, and I didn't show some of them they're really exploding. So the Cornell Study Center shows things that we don't see in finished artworks, the process, the sort of repetition and sort of finding his way by cutting things up, cross-indexing them, and then years later figuring out maybe this is also about Swan Lake.
Yeah, I mean that little star book was everywhere when I was younger, and I wonder how many people have used that star book to. I see a few hands. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Genevieve, our first question.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. This was a really fascinating.
Yeah, speak right into the mic.
This was a really fascinating forum, and we're just packed full of ideas of how we want to use all of these stories in our programming. So thank you very much, Doug. I had a question for you about the about more recent voyages of the traditional Polynesian and traditional Hawaiian voyaging canoes. So thanks for telling us the story. Can you tell us anything about the impact of the more recent voyages, for example, to the California coast of the Hawaiian voyaging canoes?
Thank you. I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to the recent California voyage. I was focused on the round-the-world voyage that they finished, 2 years ago now. I was part of that. I was on the leg in the Chesapeake Bay. And that was all about raising awareness of we have to take care of the planet. So there were a lot of stops along the way to see what people were doing in terms of positive work towards that end. That was the main thing. The real big impact, the Hokulea is seen as the mother canoe. There are now voyaging canoes all over the Pacific. There's about 14, I think, deep ocean voyaging canoes, and the whole art of navigation, but they all learned, all the knowledge comes from Maupiailug, but it's really come back with a big, powerful way. And as an inspiration for younger generations who, up until the Hokulea did its first voyage, there was all that press of, that whole business of Polynesians being great navigators, that's a load of rubbish. You stupid brown people couldn't possibly ever have done that. And then when it was proved that they actually could, then it was like, oh my God, we've got this great legacy that we have been denied and that we've lost and that now that we've gotten back. So it was very powerful.
Thanks very much.
Okay. I think, is there a hand? It's hard for me to see.
You got to go to the microphone.
Yeah, get to the microphone.
Line up.
Okay, do any of the speakers have questions for the other speakers? How many of you in your journeys have been stimulated by the need to know where you are at any one moment? Aha, Bill. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I've been around the Arctic quite a bit. I have a boat. I navigate up from Newfoundland up the Labrador coast, and we've been to Greenland and Baffin Island and so on. And we don't do it quite the way the Vikings did, but we do a lot of practical navigation. looking at landforms. You have when people were first exploring these areas, they didn't have a lot of this technology, but they had artists, and so they made drawings and sketches. And a lot of the navigation tools that people have used for a couple hundred years depended on the landform sketches and so forth that people made. And we use that same technique too when we're going around. A lot of times the electronics are down. We used to use Loran. I was in the Navy too, and we went through, I had to calculate all those long forms and everything like that. It certainly is different now, but just emphasizes the point that you know your battery can die, and then you really have to have a backup. So you know, even driving around town here.
I think there's somebody standing at the mic.
Yes, this question is for Fath. You told us to ask you, so I'm going to ask. You mentioned that sometimes slaves weren't necessarily trying to escape, but they were laying. Can you tell us more about that?
Is this on? Okay. Let me just start out by saying that it was very difficult to escape. And if you did try to escape and you were caught, there could be severe punishment, even death. And for some people, you also could be sold away from your family and further to the south. However, as more historians have studied the issue of running away, it turns out that there are a significant number of people who run away for days or weeks or months to nearby places, such Virginia, it would be, for example, the Dismal Swamp, which was very hard for people to find people in. And people might have been trying to escape sale. They might have been angry about something that happened. They might have been visiting families on other plantations that are nearby. But people a number of people would run around or run away, but later come back. And there are a lot of stories, or there is a significant amount of historical evidence that for some individuals, slave owners would tolerate this for various reasons. Like if that person had particular skills, like they're a blacksmith, and you really need those skills, it might be worth it to someone to tolerate the fact that maybe they're going to go visit their family on another plantation for a day or a week or two, and then they're going to come back, because it actually wasn't that easy to escape. So if you tolerated the fact that some people would run around or lay away, there are a lot of words for it, you would be able to maintain your property, essentially, and not have to not lose all your value in that property as if they escaped all the way. So there's a lot more of that goes on than actually escaping, in part because it's very difficult to escape. And although the Underground Railroad, which everyone here knows is not a railroad and is not underground, when I speak to the public, I often have to say this. Most people, you would have, in order to find people who might have been on the Underground Railroad to help you, usually you would need to go to a city, and then you need to be in essentially a northern city. So a lot of people actually escape on their own, or maybe they have friends who will help them, but they have to get far enough away to contact someone who might be able to help them that might actually be on the Underground Railroad. So running away is a very, very complex issue in plantation society. It's not simple at all. And although the symbol of it, and of course what many people wanted to do was to run away and escape altogether. But that was very difficult to do for a lot of reasons, and that's part of why the people who are most able to escape are young men. Because women, the idea that a woman would be out alone doing anything that would immediately be suspicious. So there are a lot of issues around running away that are not the same as just running to escape. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, another question, yes.
Yes, thank you. This is for Julia. I noticed that one or two of your slides indicated that the book came from the Julia Blakely collection. And I wondered if you could tell us about your books along in the subject and how they came to be of interest to you.
Can you repeat, repeat the question to then answer it in your own words?
Can you hear me? Thank you, Leslie. Yes, as you know, as you do, I like to collect books. The Raft book, surprisingly, you can pick up very inexpensively, from $20 to $30. The waterproof one, it seems like more and more are dribbling into the market, which is very interesting. It's like airmen kept that almost like a talisman, like a token of their survival. And I just, I forgot about it. I bid $30 on eBay for it. And I wanted to get a good copy because mine is held together with Scotch tape. And I'd eventually like to give it to the libraries. If there's any conservators here, they'll understand that. There was something about Gatti's Raft book. You can sit down and read it in one go. I mean, for me, of course, the celestial navigation part is difficult, but it's really extremely well written because he's drawing on a whole wealth of knowledge and reading. He intersperses Shakespeare, Emerson, Dante in it. It's just a really absorbing book. So then I started to collect around it. So yes, I'm beginning to get a collection, both of survival books and for navigation. Survival books actually is a fascinating topic. And the Smithsonian, it was an extraordinary production, what they did. In a mere 3 months, they had botanists, ethnologists, linguists, anthropologists, everyone across virtually every specialty in natural history write that survival guide. It's an amazing undertaking. And that, as an artifact, is so absorbing. You know, the Smithsonian's role in the war, I hadn't realized it. But I think the government's production of these survival guides is something worthy of further study. There's not a bibliography. They range from comic book form for any soldier to read to something really relatively sophisticated like the Smithsonian's.
Thank you. I think that's, we have another question. Yes.
Yeah. This is the question for the commander. I'm curious with your students, how are they handling learning this somewhat, older method of navigations when nowadays you can just pull up Google Maps and type in a destination?
They do what they're told. No, so you're right. So to get them to learn, I've got to motivate them. They got to understand and be energized for it, and that's where we bring in a little bit of, the Navy side of it. So, I can explain to them that they're not guaranteed that GPS signal when they get on their ship and get underway, right? If it can be provided, it can be taken away. And so we have lots of examples like that. The most important thing to get a ship underway, besides knowing where you're going, is where you're going from. And that applies to the ships, to the weapons that leave them, to anything that we're doing. And we need that accuracy. And it's gotten to the point where we are firing a missile off a ship into the atmosphere to destroy a ballistic missile in flight. And the accuracy and precision required for that is pretty dependent on GPS and other navigation systems. Once we're denied that and we don't know our origin point, it all becomes, the accuracy now dwindles. And to be able to explain that to them in the future careers that they're going to be going into is pilots, submariners, surface warfare, ship drivers, Marines and SEALs, they understand it and they get it, and it's just drawing those lines of why they're doing it. Now, when they're in the middle of doing it, they're not as motivated. It can be dry.
I had a question. So I know there's some artists, especially today, who have thought about the philosophy of the stars that we see are showing the light, as I understand it, from the deep past, that it's light years for that light to get to us. And it's really struck me how so many of us have talked about well, the stories we tell and what we believe, but accuracy. And there we're kind of swinging in this pendulum of accuracy and using these stars to get where you really want to go versus where you believe you're going. But how do you reconcile this from a scientific point of view with the fact that that light is from the deep past? You know, it is not of our moment.
I think you just outed me. Yes, it all determines where it comes from. And where it comes from, it remembers, by the time it gets to you, it still thinks it came from that particular point in space. And so it's that point in space which is the primary characteristic. It is fascinating to know that, I mean, when you look at Jupiter, you're seeing it as it was anywhere between 3/4 of an hour ago and an hour and a half ago, depending, and it's certainly not, you know, where it would be. Would you be able to tell the difference? Well, if you're really looking accurately, yes, you could. It would make a difference. But in terms of the practicality, no. It is a position. Now, all objects do change in their positions, and one of the important things that the Naval Observatory has been doing in its history is keeping track of the exact positions of the stars, because they all move. The fixed stellar sphere is not fixed. Depends upon how accurately you have to measure it. If you're talking about an accuracy of a mile or so over 4 or 5 years, you have to keep track of how your different stars change in position. Just to cap this conversation, although I think we have another question. Do we?
Yes. If you have time.
Okay, please, go ahead.
Okay, this is for you, Dr. Fitzhugh. You started to talk about the narwhal, and I wondered kind of where you were going to go with that, and how does that tie in to your archaeological standpoint, if that's where kind of you were going with it, and also you briefly talked about it in terms of a navigation. So where were you going to go with the narwhal, basically?
Yeah, well, the narwhal, we actually don't know too much about how the narwhal wanders around, because it only comes into contact with people and for a few months in the summer. The rest of the time it's at sea, places where it's really never observed and so forth. So that's a big problem, and it's not until now we're going to tag those animals and actually determine their positions and so forth that we're learning about where they are. But the tusk really has nothing to do with, you know, like I used to think, well, heck, maybe it's an antenna, you know. But it is helping with them, you know, because of Martin's ideas, proof really that the tusk is a sensory organ, and that the nerves, you know, go down the middle of the tusk and then they branch. Unlike every mammal teeth, the narwhal nerves branch out to the surface. And so it's got millions and millions of nerve cells right at the surface. You can imagine what it'd be like if your teeth were like this. But this probably is to detect changes in water temperature and salinity. And by doing this, it can keep itself from getting entrapped as the ice freezes over and closes their breathing holes and things like that. So,
are narwhals generally friendly?
Are what?
Are narwhals generally friendly?
Oh, they're so cuddly. You know, they're so much better. They're so much better than the polar bears. You see all the fuzzy things in the shops and on kids' hats these days. You know, they're sort of. I think if I was a polar bear, I've been run out of town now by the narwhals. They're wonderful animals, and we're just starting to learn about them.
Fascinating.
You
Okay.
had a question about the archaeology, but I didn't think I caught that. Okay.
It was more just if you were trying to tie that in, because I know you focus on archaeology, so if you were more trying to tie that into maybe what it looks like for the Inuits or even the Norse or things like that.
Yeah, that was a real weak part of my talk. What I was really only hoping to show you is that all these different groups, cultures, and so forth are navigating in the Arctic, finding their ways around, and they do it in different ways with different technologies and so forth. So the examples were just to show you how that evolves over time.
And one final question before I make one comment. Okay, go ahead.
I was going to ask for the technical people on the panel, how far away do you think we are from someone inventing a machine that could make Polynesian navigators out of all of us just by taking the signals that are coming from the sky and the knowledge of the topography and dead reckoning principles and so forth.
Well, first of all, I have to ask, will you accept some sort of an implant? Or are you saying without that implant?
No limitations.
Sorry?
No limitations whatsoever.
No limitations. Any wild thoughts?
All right, first I just want to say that I'd rather see humanity go the other way. So rather than becoming more dependent on machines and technology, we actually need to become more aware. And the navigator, the Polynesian navigators today, the Hawaiians who have become master navigators, will tell you it's a higher state of consciousness and a higher state of awareness. How do you know where the reference island is when you can't even see it? You just know. And there's a great story where a Western ship was carrying some Micronesians, and the captain said, "Oh, I've heard about these guys, are great navigators." It's like back in the 50s. "I'm going to try it out." So he goes in and he says, "Oh, my compass is broken. Can you help me get to the island we're trying to get to?" "Yeah, sure." So they help him. And sure enough, they arrive at the island. The guy says, "How'd you know the island was here?" And they said, "It's always been here." They knew where it was. They're doing dead reckoning in their heads. And aware of every, I have stories after stories after stories of this, where they're just, where a guy waking up out of a dead sleep says, "Take the sails down right now." And half an hour later, this huge wind comes up, buffets him around for an hour, stops, and he says, "Okay, you can put the sails back up," and goes back to sleep. This is a kind of awareness that we're all capable of, but we become so dependent on machines. So I'm going to stop there and pass it.
Well, yeah, we are really dependent. It's incredible, the complexity of the atomic clocks and the difficulties of launching rockets into a 12,000-mile orbit at that inclination. I could go on about that, and the result is that we get this incredible accuracy. Somebody who had this question came up about the accuracy. It's become so accurate that we now have to worry about the fact that that the continents are drifting about the rate of your fingernail growth, which sounds like, well, that's not very fast, but it can throw things off if you're trying to target a weapon or something like that. So we've gotten on this treadmill and we can't get off, that it's getting better and better as Galileo and Beidou come on stream. We now have a selection of satellites there. We can do all kinds of things. It's revolutionized farming, just-in-time manufacturing, delivery by drones, or you all know about Amazon delivering packages by drone. Things. So we have become locked into this treadmill. I really don't think we're going to be able to get off without some dire consequences.
Let me just cap it with a personal experience. In freshman astronomy at UCLA, which I took a while ago, one of the first lab exercises was determine where you are on Earth. And there were instruments on the roof that you could use, and you could choose the instruments, and I won't go into the details. And you were graded on how close you got to the right answer, okay? And the question is, what was the right answer? And it turned out that the right answer was the average of the class. Every one of us did independent observations with little transit instruments and clocks and WWV, and we calculated our positions, and we put them in, and the ones that were closest to the average got good grades. And you know what's that's called today? It's called crowdsourcing. We were being honored by being average. But it really taught us something about collective knowledge. And I think that introduction to what we might call position finding, wayfinding, using simply astronomy and the clocks and the instruments that are available to you on the roof of a building in the middle of Los Angeles, was quite an introduction for me, connecting me to the cosmos. And I hope that these questions and the presentations have connected us all a little better, not only to the cosmos as represented by the wealth of information at the Smithsonian, but by what is right above our heads. Thank you very much for coming to the program.